the YouTube page. We're live, it says. Okay. Let's see here. I think it's just us. I find that.
Yes.
I mean, seriously, I know that's kind of like, I don't know. It's my nerves. Like, I love the idea of being able to interact with people, but like my introvert status has like gone through the roof. So, this is There Is No Book Club. And this week we are live streaming about Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad. I don't know if this mirrors, if it's backwards or not. There are a couple different covers. I think this is like perhaps the original cover art that was chosen for the book. I personally really like it. And I am here excitedly with my friends Laurel and Mary. Say hi.
Hi.
Okay, so I know, I'm just real quick going to say I know Laurel and Mary from our time at school together. Laurel and I were history majors together, and because of that, we had to take French, and because of that, we met Mary, who had to take French for her major. And those were delightful times. But we've been out of school for a minute, and I'm really excited that creating book club is giving us a chance to like talk about something that I feel kind of like ticks off all the boxes for us as far as like really good reading material. So either one of you have like a fairly short-ish synopsis of the book, but you'd want to like toss out there before we start digging into like themes and topics and questions and whatnot?
I mean, for me, reading this book, it's a story of Cora trying to find freedom, but she's also trying to find her humanity and dignity. And you see her come out of her shell and become a person who can think about things that she wants outside of the expectations of slavery and the deep dark South. And it's been so beautiful.
Laurel?
Well, this book has brought, I mean, not only, like Mary said, this journey of this young woman trying to find freedom and all of these atrocities that she's either witnessed or undergone herself. And just, it speaks to the strength of, the human will. But I think that it also raises a lot of really interesting, really important, and really horrific parts of the past that so many people, even to this day, are being willingly ignorant of. And so I think that this book, not only in following along with this incredible story of this young girl, but it also has been forcing me as a white woman to come to brutal terms with the fact that all of these things that are being discussed and real. They are pieces of history. They're not, this is not just a fictional thing that somebody made up. These are all real pieces of the American history. And so it's been difficult not only to be empathetic with this person who's on this grand journey, but also, coming face to face with these things that have happened. And so much of it, if I wasn't reading this and if other people weren't reading this book, they wouldn't be forced to face. And I think that
Mhm.
that is terrible. And but also that's what makes it so important to pick it
Yeah.
up and continue
Yeah.
to read it, because but I think it's almost enraging to me that we are not making things like this mandatory in our school systems and
Mhm.
just our everyday lives. And so
Mhm.
it's been this, you know, awesome, like, oh, I love this book. I'm really enjoying reading it, but it's also brought up a lot of other themes of our modern day
Mhm.
life that I am I struggle with. And so it's been really important, I think.
Yeah. I think, no, I completely agree. And I think, like, thinking about the summary of the story, it's a young girl who's born into bondage.
Mhm.
Her grandmother is stolen from Africa.
Mhm.
And so basically, what I meant when we say like she's coming alive is we're seeing
Mhm.
her go from watching all these horrible things happen. And I don't know, at least for me in the beginning, you kind of see her, you feel like she's dissociated, like she's
Mhm.
kind of floating above her body, above her experience, and very much living day to day.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But like the key to the story is that her mom runs away when she's 10, and escapes to the Underground Railroad, which in this story is a physical railroad,
Yeah.
which I loved as like a plot, and also giving us
Mhm.
that picture of like state by state what's happening.
Mhm.
But yeah, so her mom runs to freedom when she's 10, which kind of leaves her on her own. And she's
Mhm.
working through a lot of anger and resentment towards her mom of like, how could you leave me here? But also, yeah, I don't know. In the first couple chapters, you see the light switch in her head. Um, Caesar offers her a chance to go with him in the very beginning, and she says no. But then like something flips, and you see her kind of wake up and be like, I
Mhm.
I can't I can't do this anymore.
Well,
And
Mhm.
anything is better than this.
Mhm. Mhm.
building off of that a little bit, something that I noticed in the book, where like Caesar had come to her and offered and she said no. And then
Mhm.
and you know, you said like a switch flipped, but in the book there is an actual event that occurs in which she gets hit in the head
Mm-hmm.
with
Mhm.
a cane because she in that moment she had that snap decision to defend the
Mm-hmm.
boy that was being beaten.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
it's almost like, I don't know, like that switch flip, but she literally got hit in the head.
Yeah.
And then the next time he asks her, she decides to go. And so
Yeah.
it's like
Mhm.
that. I feel like that particular event was really symbolic, or at least to me when I was reading it. I was just like, she literally got hit upside the head. And
Mm-hmm.
all of a
Mhm.
sudden, it makes sense to her to be like, I need to run.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And I just real quick, because I realized I forgot to say this. I don't want to interrupt the flow too much.
Yeah.
This
No.
will be a full spoiler up to the end of what is chapter 6 in the
Yeah.
book, North Carolina. So
Yep.
we have not gotten all the way to the end of the book yet. So
Yep.
if anyone has not read the book, we'll be talking about things that will potentially spoil you should you choose to read it. That said, still read it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's also like a little bit of a trigger warning. It's intense.
Yes, thank you. It's
Yes.
really intense. It's really, really intense.
And that's not to take away like from how necessary it is to read, but like,
Mhm.
when I was like 10 pages in, I was like,
Take a deep breath.
Yep.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
There's sexual violence, obviously racial violence. Um, yeah, but
And
it's
it's brutal.
yeah,
Brutal.
yeah.
Yeah. And I decided to read the book after watching the Amazon Prime TV show, which I would like to watch with you ladies as
Yes.
well. And that one definitely took me, like, it had been suggested a few different times, and I had stayed away from it because I was just like, I need to feel ready for this. And then after watching it, I was like, well, of course now I have to read the book and see how it, like, it's different, but it's the same. And plus I love a good visual, and I think they did a really good job with the show. So
Yes.
what I wanted to come back to, though, was when we were talking about how Cora goes from being the individual who decides to stay and then the individual who decides to leave. She's a third generation slave. So her grandmother had been captured, brought from Africa, sold again and again and again until she ends up at one plantation where one of her children survives, and that child is Mabel, Cora's mother. And then Mabel makes the decision to leave. And Ajari, Cora's grandmother, like, it seems as though she almost resigned herself to, like, the fact that she had been able to stay in one place so long at the Randall plantation, that, like, that was maybe as close to home as she could expect to have. And it feels like it says in the book, when Cora says no the first time, it's her grandmother speaking, and when she says yes the second time, it's her mother. And I love this connection between the generations. And I mean, isn't that how it goes, where we're like either the spitting image of those who came before us or the antithesis of, you know? So, and here she kind of gets to be both before landing on the side of knowing that this is no way for anyone to live. And she's like, someone's offering to take me, and maybe this means this is the time to go. And she does, and it's terrifying.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Also, I think Colson Whitehead, he's a brilliant writer. Like, I felt like I was there every step. Like, I was reading so many scenes with like sweaty palms, just like, like you feel it. You're there, you're in it, from the scenery to the way that people are speaking, and his descriptions are beautiful.
Yeah. Without being too much.
Yeah.
Like, he gives a sketch that gives you a full image, and I really appreciate it, because by doing that, you are getting your own image, but it's being, like, crafted and pointed in the direction that he wants you to go. And I don't know, I appreciated his writing. It's very concise, and it doesn't feel like he leaves a lot of extra lying around. Like, everything's a punch as you read it, or lulling in an unsettling way.
Yes, completely. Yeah, I thought his voice was really interesting too. Like, you know, there are parts when you're reading from specific perspectives. I'm trying to remember. We have Cora. We have
her grandmother.
her grandmother.
Yeah.
What's
We
the
get I think we might even get like
There's
a brief
Ridgeway.
bit of
Yes, that's what I was
teaser.
thinking. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, the actual like slave hunter.
Yeah.
And then there's Stevens, which is the young doctor.
Yep.
Get his
In
voice
South
as
Carolina.
well. Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
that was really helpful and interesting to kind of see how people were thinking about it, or how the characters were feeling in the moment. Because I mean, there's a lot of different moving parts to it. And I think it's interesting too about the voices and the perspectives that he wanted us to see. Like, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in the last 6 chapters, but I appreciate that he didn't do a lot of white perspective Like
Mhm.
he did when it was necessary for the storyline, so you can gauge who certain characters are, like with the Doctor and Ridgeway. But for the most part,
Mhm.
we're getting like the story from the Black characters, and I think that's important.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And I do, one of the things that I like quite a bit about the structure for the book is that as you're making this escape with Cora, each location is given a nightmare scenario that is not unfamiliar to the Black community. And we have the idea of eugenics, we have forced sterilization as we go along. And it's like each stop is like this is where it could have gone. And I feel like this is where you get to take something that is historically accurate in so many ways and use fiction to be like, this is something that somebody actually wanted to do. This is how this could have gone. And it's really scary. And in a lot of places, that is where things went. You know, it wasn't just that it was just like one state did it and another state did it. I think I read someplace that like forced sterilizations didn't stop in the United States until like 1981. And that's not that long ago. And that's even like no guarantee that that's actually the last one, because let's be honest, who knows? And that's the scary thing.
Right.
That's what I was gonna say. So for anyone who's interested, Killing the Black
Aw.
Body by Dorothy Roberts is like if you're interested in the history of eugenics in the United States, another really heavy read, but it because I'm extremely interested in like, you know, as a feminist in reproductive rights as well as, you know, the liberation movement, you know, Black Power, Black Lives Matter. And this book kind of converges the two. So yeah, if you're interested in that, it's I highly recommend.
I am. I love that you have additional research and options for us, because
Well,
that was
yeah, I was just gonna say that it has a lot of information about forced sterilization, and I'm blanking on the name of it, but I have another book about forced sterilization as well. Yeah, our country has a really horrifying history with treating women's bodies as public property, and the government deciding who they want to have children, how many children they should have. When you hold the kind of balance of like, you know, white women fighting for the right to be able to have an abortion, and then we have women of color who are fighting for the right to have and to raise their children in a safe environment, it's like it's yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah. That was kind of tangential, but I was really interested in that part of the book with the doctors, and it was kind of under this guise of we're better. We think we're better. Okay, I don't know if this is.
We know how to take care of you, so you just listen to us because you obviously don't know how to do it for yourself.
Yeah. When I was thinking about like Georgia versus South Carolina, it felt to me like the Republican Party versus the Democratic Party. Like, like one is just kind of like big, bad, in your face, like fuck you to the people. And then the other part can often be problematic as well, and just in a more subtle way of like, you know, we're
in the
not going to
guise of trying to help people.
Yeah, like we're not going to give you rights. You know what I mean? Like there's just kind of like they got a shit-eating grin while they fuck you over.
Yeah.
So that's what I was thinking of. Like, it's not better; it's just different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. And I think that you kind of get that in the South Carolina chapter towards the end. And I think like when Cora is starting to kind of piece together what's going on, and she's, you know, beginning to ask questions like to the Miss Lucy, you know, she's going in there asking like, hey, where are these women going from, like building 40 or whatever? Because she's piecing it together. Like, okay, I was just asked during my doctor's appointment about being sterilized. If I wanted to, you know, like he left it up to her. It was her choice. But kind of like what Mary said, where it's just like, you have rights.
Until we tell you don't.
Maybe. But, you know, and then she's starting to put together what's really going on with these people that are being taken away to hospitals and being experimented on essentially. And so I think that that's really interesting that that she can kind of see that unfolding before her eyes. And something else that I kind of wanted to touch on was, you know, throughout history and even in modern day, I think that there is like a general consensus. I mean, at least I would hope so at this point. But you know, you can never be too sure that like, okay, this was bad. Like in history, this was bad. We can all agree that this was not a great thing. There's still a lot of avoidance. And like I mentioned earlier, that like kind of willing ignorance where it's just like, well, I know it's bad, but it would be hard for me to face it, so I'm not going to. You know, kind of as that like overarching. But I think that in here, especially the chapter on like the sterilization, because I thought that that was one of those like heartbreaking ones to me where I don't know, that it was hard. That was one of those chapters where I was reading and I kind of had to put it down for a minute and be like, okay, we're getting into this now, and like this is going to be difficult. But I think that it shows that this entire portion of our history is not it there's so much gray area that doesn't get discussed.
Oh, yeah.
It's like slavery is bad. That's that overarching statement that everybody can kind of have that general consensus on. But it's like it's not black and white. Like there's so much gray area where these atrocities were being committed that nobody talks about and doesn't acknowledge that they're there. And it's like we talk about, you know, eugenics during World War II going on in, you know, Nazi Germany, and everybody's like, oh my God, that's horrific. That's terrible.
Yeah.
But there's not a discussion of that going on in our own country. And that is not good, because these things, not only are they historically accurate, but like Tracy mentioned, it wasn't that long ago that these things were still being considered you know, acceptable.
Yeah. And considering where we're standing right now with women's reproductive rights and so many things that have been happening, like,
oh yeah,
it's something you have to constantly be diligent for and constantly be fighting for, because it's just we're nowhere close to having an equitable solution. It's a mess.
Yes, it is. I think, yeah, we're very much still having to prove that we deserve to have autonomy over our own bodies in a lot of different ways. It's yeah.
Well, it's not even our, I mean, it's our bodies, but it's our minds too. Like these, you know, men in our society look at women and it's just like, well, you might change your mind. You know, like if I were to go into the doctor's office right now and ask to have a hysterectomy because I wanted to, because I didn't want children, I would be denied that because, well, you might change your mind later on, and you know, you don't really know yourself yet. And so it's not even just this, like, I can't decide for my own body, but all of the sudden, I don't have autonomy over my own thought process and my own choices for, you know, my life. So it's like, it's so frustrating to me because it's not only do I not have autonomy over my body, but I don't even know my own thoughts either, because apparently I'm gonna change them later on, and they know better.
Yeah, we see it with women in general, but also going back to forced sterilization, like Black families were and still are under attack from, mass incarceration to lack of health care. Like,
Yep.
as a country, we need to understand the horrors of slavery so that we can better protect and support families that need help
Yes.
now.
Yes. Yeah. Because we haven't really given the most reassuring medical presence at this time.
Right.
And I mean, I feel as though in Cora's visits in the book where she's being seen by the doctor, it feels so familiar because it feels really patronizing.
Yeah.
And like, this is your option. It's a great idea if you choose to do this. And they're even like, you can show yourself as a leader among the other young women here if you choose to have this operation. Like, she's doing something for the betterment of other people, but nobody's really giving her like a reason to do it for herself. It's what you can do for other people. And it feels very familiar. It feels very familiar where it's like the doctor's like, well, I know better than you. And that has to be infuriating when that's what you face when you're asking for help. Like, I need help. But if you're being treated like an imbecile, like you don't know your own body, like you have no voice for yourself, how will you ever get better? How can you take care of yourself? How can you take care of your family? Like,
I think that any woman in, even today, even modern day, that is suffering from any type of endometriosis, PCOS, anything like that, can attest to that very well. Going into a doctor's office and being like, I'm having these issues. And you know how long it takes to get diagnosed with those things? Because it's always, oh, well, it's not that bad. Like, you're exaggerating. It's not that
you're
bad.
fine.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, to this day, if we're talking about the medical history of the United States and how it treats Black people, that I don't remember where it is in the book, but I think it's where we see like the doctor's inner monologue. He's talking about how Black women don't feel pain. We see that time and time again today with how doctors ignore Black women. They don't prioritize them, and they don't hear them when they say, I need help, I'm in pain. They trivialize it.
Yeah.
But to bring it back to this, I think it's intentional. I can't remember the name of the doctor, but he knows that she's coming from a history of being enslaved. And he's not, I know it was a different time, but he's not saying like, what do you need from me? He still very much is using his power to manipulate and to insinuate that he's trying to help, but really he's trying to use and abuse her body in the name of science. But I also like that he brings up like, who is this science for if he's supposed to be helping people, but he's simultaneously killing people and robbing them of their agency. So it's like science, but it's not.
Right.
That's the guise, that's the mask, but it's not.
Yeah. And it's happened. It's terrifying. The other thing that happened once we moved from Georgia to South Carolina that I found really cringy was the museum.
Yes.
Oh, yes. I had a hard
So
time with that part as well. That's just this. Yeah.
I'm gonna close the window that's next to me really quick. I'm getting chilly. I'll be right back.
Sure. No, you're fine. Sorry. I actually remembered to mute on the last time I cleared out my throat. This time I didn't. Sorry. Got excited. So when Cora arrives in South Carolina, she's given a position working in one of the nicer houses, and she's the nanny, and she's feeling pretty good about things. And then she's moved from there to a museum. And this is supposed to be like I think like a museum of natural history kind of place, like a field museum kind of location, only on a much smaller scale. But in order to add an air of authenticity to the exhibits that are there, the museum curator has these types, quote unquote, that he chooses to put into 3 different sceneries. And so there's the image of a woman in an African village, and like the Anglo-Saxon idea of what Africa looked like if you'd never been to Africa. And then you had the crossover on the ship, which they show as like the young Black child running around and helping on top of the deck and whatnot. And then the last one being a slave, but it's a slave who's sitting at a spinning wheel and feeding little chickens and whatnot. And Cora's observation is so spot on, because she's like, I can tell you right now that slave depiction is 100% wrong.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that this one on the ship, probably also a bucket of lies. But she finds like a level of comfort. Like she likes to end her day being the African ancestor, I guess you would say, since it's kind of like in that thing. And she's like, it's almost like coming back to a home, and she finds it very like calming and soothing. But it's another instance where this is what we think these things looked like, because this is what we have been taught. And yet the actual history of it, that opening with Ajari and coming to the United States after her capture and whatnot, was just that is not cavorting and playing on the top of a ship. It's potential death, and at the very least starvation, lice, skin problems, like no fresh air, no walking, just chained together. But would they ever put that in a museum?
Right.
Like especially at that time period where they're like, we're lifting up,
It's that avoidance of guilt there again, where it's like, we don't want to make it known that like the conditions were as bad as they were. And so it's that rewriting of history and putting this, it's a white perspective on the entire, journey from here to here, where it's like, oh well, we went to Africa and we convinced these people to get on the boat, and we they played on, they were given leather boots, things like that, like the boy on the ship is wearing nice clothes and wearing boots, and the people are being appreciative of him doing the chores on the boat deck, things like that, and then coming and wearing a nice dress and sitting at a loom is just that the entire journey has been completely twisted. That perspective is just, but that's what's
it's
easy
wishful thinking.
That's what's easy for people to digest. it doesn't
But
force
it's like, but we're talking about slavery. When we're talking about enslaving people, that's why I think that's why that whole thing was so gross, is
Yeah.
because you know that that's not the reality, and you feel disgusted that
Yep.
white people would, go so far as to value their own feelings about what happened
Right.
above the reality. It's it's so disgusting, and it's so disturbing to see that they can't process the things that their parents, their grandparents, their great grandparents have done. And so even for the groups of people that were, trying to do better, but they weren't, they are just trying to feel better. They're trying to, pat themselves on the shoulder and say like, but I'm not that. And it's like, you're participating in, you're complicit.
Yeah, and I would say it also gives them an excuse, if you will, to not be up against what's happening in the states around them. Because if this is the view that they're adhering to, that this is the actual trajectory of life as a slave, well, then it's not that bad in the other states. They don't need to get upset about it. All of the terrors that everyone's been hearing are clearly exaggerated. So you also lull the people that are coming there who may otherwise find the conditions that slaves were being exposed to as much of an atrocity as they were, instead of giving them this like diluted, inaccurate portrayal.
Yes. And also like Cora didn't choose to be there. She basically was pulled from an environment that she was, she was semi-happy being a nanny and working in this home. And then she was pretty much told like, they want you at the museum. And so this whole thing of her being treated better, and there's this guise of like, South Carolina isn't, like other states, it's better. But you can see throughout the whole chapter, she has no choice in anything. And when she does push back to Miss Lucy, like Laura was talking about, of like, where are these women being taken to? You see the agitation, you see the pushback of, she like kind of threatens her and is like, don't worry about it, don't ask about it, are you going to cause trouble? It's like it's those reminders of stay in your place, because it could be you. Like, this is better, so just keep your head down and shut up.
Right.
Yep. Because we know the truth that your options are worse, and for some odd reason that whole like, this is a step up, it's better.
I was gonna say, I would argue it's more dangerous, because like the people aren't even aware of what they're doing. So like the physical violence is one thing, but the mental and emotional, I would say like, it's like psychological warfare.
Yes.
The mental gymnastics that they're putting these people through is fucked up. But I was really interested reading the chapter about North Carolina, where they were talking about the shows they would put on with the people in blackface, comparing that to like the museum performances. Like, because in the North Carolina chapter, they have these shows that end with a lynching, and it's extremely violent, extremely disturbing.
And they do this every Friday.
Yeah.
Once a week they do this.
Yeah. But if you juxtapose that with the museum, it's striking how similar they are. Like, obviously one is more physically violent. Someone is murdered at the end. But I was really interested in that because they were so similar, you know, in the ways that they kind of made these people, Black people, perform for them. Well, within the blackface, it was a caricature. It was a violent caricature, but
Right.
it was very clear that they had similar ideas about Blackness and Black history and what it meant to be African American. Even if one was supposed to be informative and one ended in a lynching, it was ultimately similar ideas that were like bleeding through.
Yeah. I think the idea of a caricature is played out in each state, really.
Yeah.
Like there's that section in Georgia where, excuse me, on the Randall plantation, the sons come out and they're like, play music, dance for us. And Cora makes the observation that like certain people, certain slaves will behave a certain way, knowing what is expected of them and doing it as a way to avoid future punishment. So they are aware of this farce that they have to pretend to be something they are not in order to hopefully avoid notice in a negative way, which can potentially have dire consequences. So there's always this is what people expect, and playing up to it. I'm just thinking like how much of that audience push is based on fear.
Oh yeah.
Because I would definitely say that's like such a huge part of this story overall is just the impact of fear where it's felt throughout the various places in the book. But I don't want to stray too far away from.
I think that is kind of a reoccurring theme throughout the book, is that fear and the way that it influences your survival mode. But another kind of theme that I was thinking while you were talking about that I really saw over and over again, especially in the earlier chapter, I think in Georgia specifically, it really kind of struck me the lack of community that the slave village had. These people, like people who are in the same situation, in suffering these atrocities right next to each other, are so manipulated that they see each other as the enemy as well. And what is this is going to sound, I don't want it to sound the wrong way, but like what an ingenious way for the white man to be in control. Like
it was intentional.
It's intentional to sever that sense of community, that sense of hope. It's like if we can make sure to keep everyone isolated and in competition with each other, we will never have to worry of a collective uprising. And so that was apparent to me in the beginning, before she went, before she ran off to join the railroad, was the relationships in the slave village and how poorly she was treated. Not only, from her, her assault, but also just the way that everybody competed for 10 feet
Everything.
of 10 feet of land.
Any semblance of humanity that they could take was.
Well, and so I have a line marked here that really hit me. Sorry, one second, let me find it.
No, go for it.
I'm so sorry. Okay, right here. It was where they were talking about how they would have like wrestling matches for like the entertainment of the people running the plantations, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And it says here, it's on page 28, kind of at the top. And it says, the young man and his opponent twisted in the grass. Take it out on each other if you cannot take it out on the ones who deserve it. And that hit me because there again, it's that severed tie of community where
Mm-hmm.
the person sitting next to you, even though you are both equally in bondage and equally undergoing these atrocities, as long as you can beat him, you have a better chance of survival. And
Mm-hmm.
that's terrible.
Mm. Or at least you're taught to think that you're better
Mm-hmm.
off, because
Right.
if you
Right.
start to actually like pulling apart,
Yeah.
pull apart who's to blame,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
it's not going to be your neighbor. It's not going to be.
Yeah. But
Mm-mm.
it's just that, like you said, that's what they've been taught.
Mm.
And so it's just it was so heartbreaking to see
Mm-hmm.
this complete just isolation, even in a community of
Mm-hmm.
people undergoing very similar,
And
experiences.
there's always another layer of being an outcast or being at the bottom of the heap. And this is one of the things that I find really hard. I find this really hard to understand, this desire to pull everything and everyone apart and to put things. I mean, in some ways I get it, in other ways I don't. It's not how I would want the world to be. What I'm getting at is, maybe I don't know what I'm getting at.
Well, okay.
Yeah, help me, Mary.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is what I've been thinking about as I'm reading this, like systems of domination, where
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's basically the principle that our country has been founded on, is that
Mm-hmm.
you have to fight tooth and nail for everything you have. Everyone's your enemy, everyone's your
Mm-hmm.
competition. Like, yeah, no community, no
Mhm.
sense of, being your brother's keeper. It's just every man for himself, every
Yeah.
person for themselves. But in the context of early on in the book, it's domination is king.
Yeah.
It's
Mm-hmm.
if you can, you will.
Yeah.
Like if you can take something from someone else, take it.
Yeah.
If something can be taken from you, defend it. Like,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I marked something for kind of what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
Especially talking about like, the American spirit, if you want to say.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple of sections here, page 78, it says something about, they were talking about like the slave catchers, and about how in other countries during that time they would have been considered criminals, but in America it was considered like a profession that was respected.
A
And
respectable profession.
yeah, but even more so, going back to what Mary was saying on page 82, it kind of gives this idea of that American attitude of like manifest destiny, where it talks about, it's about halfway down, it says, if they were supposed to have their freedom, they wouldn't be in chains. If the red man was supposed to keep hold of his land, it'd still be his. If the white man wasn't destined to take this new world, he wouldn't own it now. And
Yeah.
just it's that theme of domination, like you were saying, where it's just like, we like, if it's meant to be, it will be, which is why
and
that
the
is so
fact that like
dangerous.
he puts it up at the top as unstoppable racial logic.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
just a few lines above where he's like, well, of course this is what's happening and this is making sense. This is just logic. And it's like,
Yeah.
no.
Laurel,
No.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. I was just reading something, an article, I think it was by Salty.
I like
They,
salty.
yes, they're so good. They posted something about the similarities between like New Age thought and the alt-right movement. And I think that's so interesting. Like when we're thinking about this idea of what's meant to be will be, like it's if we're talking about present day, you see it all the time in a lot of like love and light, white women's spaces. It's like, everything happens for a reason.
Which is such a dangerous concept, especially when you put it into the context of this.
Of racism.
Of racism.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It takes any agency, any necessary moves that need to be made by the individual and says, what can you do?
Yeah.
What can I do? It's like,
you can do better is what you can do. Yeah.
Talk to your parents, talk to your, racist neighbor, like, we can't.
Also challenge yourself to do better too. It's like our work is never done.
Completely.
Like we are so far away from where we need to be, even hundreds of years later. And so our work is never done. No one's work is ever done when it comes to these topics of racism, of sexism, of oppression in general. Like it needs to constantly be challenged.
Completely. And especially growing up in Indiana, it's like, I know I have so much work that I need to do.
Yeah.
Always.
Oh, yeah.
Like, the shit that's ingrained in your system that comes from school, from the news, from your community, from your church. It's just like, it's there. Yeah. And as much as you want to resist it or want to think that you're one of the good ones who wouldn't have done something like this, who wouldn't behave that way, it's like,
Sorry about that.
Oh my gosh, you're totally fine. I constantly am like trying to check myself.
Yes.
And understand and listen better. I'm working on that one.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I identify with that like so much because growing up in the Midwest, growing up in a farming family, growing up in a very I don't want to say anything poorly about my family. Obviously, I love them very much, but it wasn't until I was quite grown where I began to realize the error of my own thought process and action and what I grew up in, thinking it was totally normal. And so like you said there, where it's just like I want to believe that I am an ally. I want to believe that I am one of the good ones, but I am only on a short journey thus far, and I will never stop having to learn and having to adapt my thought process. And I think the biggest thing about that is being willing to do so and being willing to be called out and being willing to be challenged and also to understand like a lot of these things I will never understand 100% because of who I am, how I was born, things like that. There's just certain things I'm not going to be able to identify with, and I have to be okay with that and not feel personally attacked at being like, hey, I appreciate this, but you're never going to understand, is something that you have to be willing to hear and be like, you know what, you're right.
Well, that's okay. That's why I love this book so much, is because it brings up the horrors of what happened, and it doesn't leave room for like personal narratives of like, oh, but myself and my relationship, and it's just like, this is the shit that happened.
Yeah.
Pull yourself away from, because I don't mean it in the way of like, all white people are inherently bad. I don't mean that. I mean like, we're born in a country that this is our history, and we have work to do in pulling all this shit out and looking at it so we can make sure we're not hurting. We're not continuing, the generations of trauma. And so we can become part of the solution and not add to the problem. I don't, as long as you are aware, as long as I am aware that my work isn't done, we're on part of the right track.
Yeah.
It's an everyday thing.
Yeah.
I think it's, yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
Yep.
so I kind of reverting back. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm looking through my notes.
No apologies. No apologies.
I was going to
You're
say,
fine.
guys, it's amazing. I feel like we're doing a very good job of trying to like hold a thought. I'm thinking back to when we were in a French study group and we would go to a study and it would be 4 hours later on a Tuesday night. And we're like, well, I got one flashcard. So,
right.
No, I do respect that a lot. We've definitely grown in that because we would meet up at Conjure and it'd be like 3 hours later and it'd be like, oh shit, I need to go home. We haven't done any studying yet.
yeah.
So good.
Worth it.
Good for us.
Worth it.
Oh my God, completely.
No, you guys kept me sane in college.
Exactly. That's exactly
Agreed.
why it was worth it. Sanity.
Agreed.
But
yeah.
we were talking a little bit about like how the community had been severed, or the sense of community having, anybody close to you. Because I mean, Cora even touches on it. I forget which chapter it's in, but where she finally gives. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was just, we had talked about that, and there had been a quote that had like stuck with me, like connected to like the whole rule by fear and everything, but also to what you're saying and how easy it is to like break them apart because of what's been built up.
Yeah.
But it says, no mean feat in a village teeming with treacherous natures and informers who would sell out their dearest to escape the bite of the cat o' nine tails.
Yes.
Yep.
So like the consequences of coming against what is expected of you are not small ones. They're terrifying.
Yeah.
So
and in a lot of ways, it's the difference between being alive and dying.
Yeah.
With every instance. It's
I
like
just thought, sorry.
No, not at all. You go ahead.
My camera keeps like lagging a little bit, and so I'll like think that somebody's done talking, and then like I'll hear your voice again, and I'm like, oh shit.
No, I'm like,
it's totally okay.
I'm always the person that's like, and I have something else to say. Let me just.
I know, me too. But
No,
I thought it was really interesting in the book because so we know that Cora's mother runs away, and she's one of the only successful ones to ever make it off the Randall plantation without being found. But I forget where it is in the book, but it was kind of one of those like aha moments when you're reading where she finally states that she hates her mother. That she is angry with her mother for leaving her behind and not even like attempting to come and find her after. And so it speaks to that like deep rooted hurt within the community, within these people, that even the mother is willing to abandon her child because of this, these horrors that she's undergoing. It's like, I couldn't imagine having to decide between like, I have this opportunity to run, but I have to leave my baby. Like it's that's hard. That's hard.
But I would tie that back into when you were talking about the scene where the men are wrestling. I would, and they're taking it out on each other because that's who they can take it out on. I would tie that in because Cora's hating her mother
Yeah.
because she's
Mhm.
not there,
Right.
because
Mhm.
she can't be free like her,
Yeah.
because this system has made that impossible.
Right.
So
Mhm.
I think some of it is, you know, feelings of abandonment, but it's also, I think, displaced anger.
She should be
Yeah.
angry at her captors, at her, you know, the situation that she was put
Mhm.
in. She shouldn't be angry at her mother for taking that opportunity. But because of this, you know, this emotional, physical, all these types of manipulation that these people have undergone for centuries,
Mhm.
Mhm.
they have on purpose been able to direct this anger. It like their captors have been able to
Mhm.
or like
Like deflect
redirect,
the anger.
yeah,
Yeah.
redirect the anger, and so it's never fallen on them.
Yeah.
But something else, is page 97. It's where it's talking about language.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting as well, because it said in the old days her mother had told her that half language was the voice of the plantation, and it talks about how
Mm.
they'd been stolen from like
Mhm.
all over Africa, so they had all sorts of, you know, different languages. um but it says here, for simplicity, to erase their
Mhm.
identities, to smother uprisings.
Mhm.
Yep.
And so it's like even language was being taken out of these people's identities. Something, you know, that piece of home was being severed.
Mm.
And so it's like there is absolutely no way for them to create any type of community, any type of identity whatsoever. And it's just, like I said before, in a horrible way, it's ingenious. It,
Mhm.
I mean, and I think it speaks a lot to, um, the way that the United States government dealt with the Native Americans. And
Mhm.
you know, I was seeing some common themes with that as well, where it's like, if we can sever this culture all the way down to its roots, then we can control it. And
Mhm. And because we were able to do it, we deserved it.
yeah,
That it's
what's meant
our
to be
win.
will be. And
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
Lots of being facetious there. I don't actually mean
No,
that. Just
yes,
in
yes.
case I
yeah,
Oh
need
my
to
God,
explain it. Yeah.
completely.
yeah.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
That's what that,
Oof.
like, what's meant to be will be. It
It
you
takes
have to be willing to have a severe degree of evil for that to be able to be a true statement.
and
And
lack of self-awareness, or like
yeah,
understanding that, like,
I was gonna say ego.
yeah, yep.
Like a lot of this always seems to come down to the need to be better than someone else.
yeah,
Like we have it even like I really liked where this started as far as in Africa,
Mm.
where we have a
mhm,
Jari caught and brought, and we have the crossing of the Atlantic to North America at the time, and the fact that it was other Africans in some ways being economically coerced into capturing other Africans who then were sold to the slave trade. So
Mhm.
it's like, we're going to get you to do this awful thing, to do this awful thing, to then move that awful thing. And the whole time, the European powers were like, yeah, that sounds about right. I like
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
you guys go ahead with that. I approve. But then you have like this dissension from Africa to here and then moving along through the different places, and it's because you never know if you're going to stay in one place. It's the same thing as the language
Mm.
breaking down, like you said, like not keeping a bunch of people who can all speak the same language. Well, once you start getting comfortable and feeling like you belong in a community, you can be sold, you can be moved, you can be transplanted to a different part of the plantation even. And
mhm,
it's almost like being sent to a different state entirely. So the pieces that were put in place to make it so that no one could ever feel safe were quite intentional.
Yeah.
And boo.
Mm-hmm.
Boo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I feel that.
Yeah. No, I
So
completely
let's
agree.
see here. Do either of you have like another location that you wanted to go to from here? Theme?
Let me consult.
Yeah.
Yes, please do.
I did have a thought. I think it kind of floated away. I'm trying to find it again.
I understand that happens to me all the time. Mm-hmm.
It
Yep.
just kind of went somewhere else.
Yeah.
There's just this book is fantastic. It is so heavy.
Yeah. I
That
think, yeah.
there's so even discussing these things, as important as
Mhm.
they are, it's just I feel like my heart feels heavy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's definitely this sense of a little bit safe and then totally ripped from that safety, put into another spot of
Yeah.
like danger and what will happen next. So there's never, and I imagine that this has to be reflective of the way that the Black community and people of color very often must feel in the United States. Like, can they be safe out in public because of their skin color? Will they be looked out for in the same way as a white person would be? Like,
Yeah.
it's not like this stopped happening just because, the Civil War ended the way that it did and civil rights unfolded the way that it did. I mean, that was what, like 100 years? It took 100 years before like a big civil rights push was actually successful, and we're still 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
2022. Sorry.
no, I'm right there with you.
Perpetually stuck in 2020. No! Sorry.
Yeah.
No, I
No, I
literally
know.
think of 2000, like the year 2000 was 10 years ago to me.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I know.
Like, I just saw something the other day. A girl from my high school has a kid who's going into kindergarten, and it said class of 2035. And I was like, the what?
Yeah.
That's
2035?
time.
I was like,
Yeah.
It's wild.
in the world.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to find it, but as I was reading this book, I was thinking a lot about James Baldwin.
Mhm.
And
Who is that? Tell
he
me who
is
that is.
a brilliant queer author. He wrote If Beale Street Could Talk. He wrote Giovanni's Room. He brilliant. We should definitely read
I was
James
gonna say, do we
Baldwin
need
here.
to add this person to our list?
Yes, but
Good.
he was a civil rights activist with Malcolm X and
Mhm.
Martin Luther King. So
Mhm.
they were all close friends, and he was widely asked to speak on the Black experience, and he did he amazing. But I'm trying to I have a couple different quotes pulled up, but there was one in particular that I'm trying to find. But the one that I was thinking of is he says, "You never had to look at me. I had to look at you. I know more about you than you know about me. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced."
Mhm.
Um, and they talked about that in the book too. Of Cora was talking about how the overseers, the enslavers, wouldn't know one enslaved person from another. They
Yep.
would see them as this collective way of, getting more profit, a means to an end.
Mhm.
But she's saying how she knew more about them. She saw them,
Mhm.
and she
Mhm.
saw the depravity that was in their minds, in their hearts. Yeah. That's something that I've been thinking about reading this a lot.
I was just gonna say that actually makes me think of the moment where she decides that once each shift, she's gonna give the evil eye to one person that's looking at her in the museum.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's her way of saying, "Look at me. You don't have a choice. Like, you may be seeing me here, but
Yeah.
you aren't seeing me here, and I'm going to make you." Like, she makes them face what they're afraid of.
Yes.
And I think it's kind of her, like, the small war of attrition. Like, if she can just get one person to feel afraid of the situation that she's facing, to see
Yeah.
even like a glimmer of truth, then
Mm.
it feels a little bit good to her. And I
Fuck yeah.
It gives her that control in that situation
Mhm.
in which she is being put literally on display.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
has
so
such a small amount of control to be able to exert, like, told what to wear, told how to have her hair done, you know? It's
if she can find that small piece of power in that moment, then
Mhm.
yeah.
And that's exactly what they don't want her to find. They don't want anyone that they've,
Yeah.
put their boot on. This is my property.
I have I have another James Baldwin quote that I think is
Ooh, yeah.
applicable
Mhm.
just because I can't say it better than he can. But
I
he
get that.
says, this is not a racial problem. It's a problem of whether or not you're willing to look at your life and be responsible for it and then begin to change it.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
I like that.
Right?
Mhm.
Yep.
Be
Yeah.
responsible for your life and willing to change it.
Yep.
Mhm.
Also another plug. He has
Please.
there's a documentary about James Baldwin on Amazon Prime called I'm Not Your Negro.
Okay.
Required. It's so brilliant. You will cry. It is like this. It's heavy. But yeah, I'm not your Negro.
I'm writing it down so I don't forget.
Yeah.
I think that quote though that you just read about like taking responsibility and you have to be willing to change is why we're still facing issues of not only racism. I mean, that can be applied to so many things in our world. I mean, climate change,
Yes.
Mhm.
all sorts of things. It's because, and we've touched on it already a couple of times, but it's that it would be hard for me. It would be
Yeah.
hard for me, and I don't really want to,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
that means that I would
I
have to
have to
put in
change.
emotional,
Mhm.
physical, monetary, all types of effort,
Yep.
and I don't, that would be inconvenient for me. That would be
And it would
inconvenient.
upset my status quo, and I like what
Yeah.
it is right
Yeah.
now.
And it
And
So,
would
to
challenge my perspective on who I
yeah.
am and where I've caused harm.
Right.
yep.
Right. It
Yeah.
causes me to not only be responsible, but for but accountable for
Mhm.
my actions, my words, my everything.
Mhm.
And people don't want to do that. They don't want to be
It
told that they did
is.
something wrong or that they're actively doing something wrong.
Mhm.
And so yeah,
Something I think about, do you mind if I say this really quick?
Go right ahead,
of
please.
course.
Something I think about a lot when we're talking about racism and race in America is how much white people, potentially like celebrities, white people in positions of power, are afraid of being accused of racism, being accused of saying something racist, doing something
Mhm.
Mhm.
like no one wants to be canceled, right? But it's
Mhm.
this idea of that's the worst thing that can happen to you. Can you
Mhm.
think of what the worst thing that could happen to a person of color would be?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like for you, like when I just get irritated when people are like, well, it's the worst thing in the world to be called a racist or that I've done something racist or said something racist. It's like, is it? Is that the worst thing?
What if you were the recipient of racism?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that, yeah, I'm just thinking about that.
I mean, as difficult as it is, being wrong is okay.
Yes.
Being wrong is okay.
Yeah.
Because it gives you an opportunity to learn how to not be quite as wrong next time. And maybe
Yes.
you can help other people along the way. Like, it has to be a collective effort in multiple circles on multiple platforms. It can't just be a hit or miss conversation. It has to be something that is constantly unfolding and growing. And I feel as though books like this, like that take history and turn it into fiction, this is where fiction gets its power from,
Yes.
is being able to be massively appealing. Like, you may not be a big geek like me who wants to read research books, and that's fine. I'll read them for you. But obviously, Colson Whitehead has done a lot of research, a
Yeah.
lot of thinking about this. This is not an easy journey for him as an author either, and he did it, and
Yeah.
I am grateful. But I think that the more that we can recognize that there are so many stories like this that are out there that need to be told so that we don't slip up and keep making the same mistakes. I mean, think about it. How far are we away from 100 years since World War II? Like 20-ish,
Yeah.
little over. Like,
Me, the non-history
100
major, like 5, 15, 4. Like, I'm just like,
yesterday. The thing is like, it's easy to look at things and be like, oh, that happened so long ago that we don't have to look at it as a reality any longer. And the problem is once we stop looking at the reality of it, we stop taking it seriously. And we just think that everything is fine and we're moving ahead and everyone's living this great life. And if you're not, it's your fault. That's on you.
Well,
You should be better.
just okay. So
Yes.
from my perspective of working in a museum, I
Mhm.
work in a history museum, and we get artifacts in all the time, and there's actually a timeline of when things start to appear, when things
Who?
start to surface and people find them. And
Mhm.
it's this interesting point at which an object becomes an artifact, if that makes sense. There's a timeline in which that happens. And in museums, you typically, an object becomes an artifact after it's been in existence for 50 years. So, like right now, a lot of people are finding things from World War II that they're like, "Oh, this is an artifact." You know, it's my grandpa's or my great grandpa's, and now they're starting to bring these things into the museum. Before that, it was World War One. Before that, it
Mhm.
was, the Revolutionary War.
War of
And so,
1812.
yeah,
Civil
exactly.
War.
We're moving in increments of time at which events become history. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, like, the artifacts that we're getting in the collection nowadays and that we are considering, like, really important and valuable, are artifacts from 50 years and before. And so
Mhm.
it's just interesting to me that all of a sudden that is what is considered history. And
Mhm.
it's no longer looking at it as just like something that happened in the past. It's looking at
Mhm.
it as something that's really important and we need to learn from now. And so I'm wondering, I had this thought the other day. I was wondering, I was just like, so when did the things that happened in like the 60s, let's say like the civil rights movement, when does that go from being a movement to something that we need to study in history? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does. And actually, it makes me think quite a bit about how public historians are moving through various things that are happening currently, like with the Black Lives matter protests. There were people
Right.
like museum curators who were out and about day of, who were
Mhm.
like picking up pieces of poster boards or t-shirts or
Yeah.
shattered glass from what had happened. So I think arguably history is constantly unfolding. It's just when we decide it becomes like that artifact status, though.
And that's
Yeah.
absolutely interesting that you say that, because we have things in the collection from the 2020, protests that were happening right downtown here. Like we have one of the not posters, but it was like the murals that they painted downtown. And we've got one of those in the collection. We have one of the gas canisters in the collection, things like that. But we can't put them on display yet,
Yeah.
if that makes sense, because it's still too raw.
Because the police officers still work for the Fort Wayne department.
And we do run into some problems with that. But that's what I'm saying, though, is that these things exist. These events, as soon as they occur, and Tracy, I know you, like, I completely agree with what you're saying, is that history just happened a moment ago.
Yep.
It's happening continuously. History is not within some confines of time. It's a linear thing. It continues. It's going on all the time. But in our society, we have these constraints almost on what is considered history, on what is considered worthy of learning. And it's just interesting to see.
Well, and if you remove it from now, it removes its immediacy. And like, instead of seeing it freshly as what has just happened, you have that lens of time. Like, I think in film history, there's only ever been like one or two movies that were made of a war while it was happening, because nobody wanted to watch a war movie while they were living through the war. But like,
Yeah, we saw
20 years later, where it feels like, exactly like World War II, with movies that came out in the 60s. Like, it makes it nostalgic at that point, as opposed to, and you can stop thinking about all of the really painful aspects of it, if you will. Like, maybe at that point you've reinforced for yourself that you did all you could and you were there to make the best of it, kind of thing. And
well,
I mean, memory blinds as much as it illuminates, really, because it's so easy for it to be different for each one of us, for it to shift as time goes by. Like, I think the sharing of human suffering and human pain, the way that we see it in the novel, is one that, to one extent or another, we can feel. Like, I may not be able to understand all of what is happening, but I can understand the pain that life has to offer from time to time. We all do. And it may just be different magnitudes, different resources to be able to handle it. That said, going back to like we kind of touched on prejudice a little bit, and like how things got shifted, because when we're in the book, and Cora gets from South Carolina to North Carolina. North Carolina is just another place where everything is fucked and nothing is right. And it's at that point, I think one of the lines in the book is, North Carolina hadn't outlawed slavery. They had outlawed the slave or the person or whatever.
They wanted
they were just
people gone, and so
Yeah.
they started lynching.
Yeah. Indiscriminately.
I think so. Tying the North Carolina chapter in, I I was just thinking about the ways that there were all these myths throughout the book about like how to avoid punishment, how to avoid cruelty, certain ideas about what it meant to survive. This will help you survive,
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately what we see is it doesn't matter. Like,
Nope.
like everyone is at the whim. Like Black
Mhm.
people in this time period were at the whim of the white people around them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so it, I don't know.
And then once they had removed as many Black people as they could, they brought in the waves of immigrants.
Yeah.
And even though these are German and Irish immigrants, therefore giving them white skin, they are still treated just slightly better than the slaves are. It seems like. I don't know how accurate that is. It seems as if slavery feels way, 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 way more extreme and worse.
Yeah.
And I think what Cora hits on, regardless of the disparities, the big one being at the end of the work week, immigrants were paid.
Yes.
They could buy their way out of whatever bondage they had chosen for themselves. And
Mhm.
that had never been an opportunity for Cora. She was born into slavery. She was never given an opportunity to buy her way out of slavery. So the fact that she is very clearly seen as and legally represented in the country as property
Right.
is a very large difference between hiring and owning property.
Right.
So, and of course that influences how you treat people.
Yes.
Right.
Completely. I love that you brought that up. One of the quotes that really stood out to me was at the end of chapter 6. I'm going to find it so I don't butcher it. Okay. Yeah. It's on page 1. It's just short. It's on page 192. So Fiona, the Irish girl who works for Martin and Ethel. Spoiler alert. So after she kind of like throws them under the bus, she turns them in. She says, "A girl's got to look after her interests if she's gonna get ahead in this country."
Yep.
Like I think about this all the time. Not to say that it's the same, but something I see a lot as a nanny that I've seen with previous families that I've worked for is when they, let's say yell at their kids, and then their kids are yelling at other kids. They're like, "I don't know where she gets it from. I don't know why I don't know why he's doing this." It's like this idea of Fiona's operating inside of this I don't know what word I'm looking for. She's living in this environment where that's what you have to do to survive. She's seeing it happening, and so you want to be like that bitch, and that bitch. But also that is the epitome of what it meant to be lower, lower class white was, you have to have something to give in order to have some kind of personhood. You have to turn on the people below you in order to rise up.
Right.
Yeah. Or against the people above you in order to take their place.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is kind of the direction that she takes here. And the fact that like she could go to someone and say this is what's happening and that they would listen to her is also like a statement of difference between where Cora was and where Fiona was. Like if Cora would have tried going, who would she have gone to be like, we're medical experiments? Who would have listened to her? Would anybody?
Yeah.
But because in North Carolina, you have this fear-based, oh God, what else? There's
Yeah.
There's so many like underpinnings to like how people are behaving in North Carolina. It's really quite upsetting. I think my thought just floated away again. Oh well, someone saved me. Yeah, save me, Mary, save
I
me.
got you. I got you. No, yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
My
I'm right.
brain is like
Oh my gosh.
in meltdown mode.
Oh my gosh. I'm right there with you. Hey. What is
It's
it?
all right.
Yeah.
Like
I know
an
things.
hour
I
and a
know.
half of talking. I know certain things.
I keep having my notes and I'm like jotting things. Like I'm just like, don't
Yep.
forget that. Come back
Don't-
to that.
And then I come back to it. I'm like, that's not what I wanted to talk about. Why did I write that down?
That's 2 words. What am I supposed to pull from that?
No. One of the things that I find in my life that I say to myself frequently is that I cannot other people.
Mhm.
And I know so often I'll be like, I hate this about everyone. And like those just generally blanket styled statements where
Mhm.
you remove the humanity of the people involved and what happens when we start to whittle down the humanity of the people involved. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
Fiona's just a little bit above Cora. But then what does that mean as far as like Ethel and her husband in their social structure too, because they're still under someone else, because like the law, the night riders can come through and without warning go through their house and look for slaves,
Mhm.
and it doesn't matter. I like how it said that people in the community used it as like a badge of pride to be
Yes.
like, my house has been searched 3 times.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yeah, completely. It's like it's going back to that like mentality that we were talking about earlier of like I'm one of the good ones.
Mhm.
Mhm.
It's that
Yeah.
like a tokenism kind, or not tokenism. It's like
Look
oh,
at how good I am.
yes. It's
I behaved so well.
yes. Yeah. Which is a trauma response. That's a yeah. Yeah, there's a
That
quote. There's a quote that I love that says I oh my gosh, I'm gonna butcher it, but I'm gonna try and say it. It says,
Go for it.
I don't want to succeed if my success depends on your failure. Something to that
Oh, yeah.
effect.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
I think about that all the time. I don't want to be a winner if I can only be a winner when you're a loser or something like that. Like I don't want
Mhm.
to participate in this system in which I have to trample and discard you in order to be myself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this book has done an excellent job of presenting the web that Black people had found themselves in.
Mhm.
Like like thinking about the North Carolina chapter and when you were saying, Tracy, that
Mhm.
it was like they like were trying to get rid of all the Black people.
Mhm.
Um it's like we as Americans went to Africa and captured human beings, brought them here, and then said, we don't want you anymore, kind of a
Mhm.
thing. Like there it's just such a lack of humanity in the
Mhm.
obviously, but in the whole system that says,
Mhm.
I did this and it's your fault,
Mhm.
kind of a
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
That's what I was feeling when I was thinking about it. I was like, how horrible can you be? How cruel and separate from humanity, like depraved, that's the word.
And what kind of fears do you have built up around what you have created that you know is wrong? Like, one of the things that I find really interesting to think about is our time period here.
Yeah.
So if you think about 1776, United States of America, the Declaration of Independence, freedom for everyone, with a few exceptions, but we'll get to that later, or maybe never, unless we have a war. That's what happened. Like, in
Yes.
order to like make us united, it was like, we'll talk about slavery later, and like just kind of pushed it under the rug. So of course it comes to a boiling point, because you can't build something and say it's this one thing and have those words out there for everyone
Yeah.
and
Well,
not expect people to be able to understand and want that for themselves.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Sorry, Laurel.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was another one of my notes. On page 119, Cora is talking about the Declaration of Independence, because that one young boy, Michael, could recite the Declaration of Independence as almost like a party trick for his owner, essentially.
Owner.
Yeah. And she talks about how she understood some of the words, and that she specifically remembered created equal from the Declaration of Independence. And she talked about how it says the white man who wrote it didn't understand it either, if all men did truly not mean all men. And so I had that
I
marked
underlined
anyway.
that part
Me
too.
too. That's
Like,
where I
knew,
was going to.
I was like,
Yeah.
knew what you were talking about right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I loved, I mean, not loved, it's really sad, but I like the sentence down too, where she's talking about how like where she's talking about like whether you could hold it in your hand like dirt, or something like that you couldn't, like freedom, and how those things were still valuable. And so I don't know, that part was sad.
Yeah. There's an instance that I'm thinking of too in the last chapter that we read, where she's talking about freedom as an idea of like, on the plantation she wasn't free, but she could roam she could roam to all these different places. And then when she's in North Carolina, she's stuck in the attic for 4 months, and she's like, here I'm free, but I'm not free. I'm in this 3 by 6 foot space.
Yes.
I can't stand up. What does that mean? What does freedom
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another, okay, sorry if I'm completely switching paces here, but something else that I had marked at 2 different spots in the book, one a little earlier on and then one a little later. She mentions briefly, let me make sure I have them both. Okay, yeah. I thought it was interesting, I don't know why. I guess maybe it's just like growing up in the Midwest. I think of hearing like I just assume I'm going to read about religion a lot. And in this book she mentions it a couple of times, but it was interesting to see her perspective on it. The first portion that I marked was on page 66, where she said Fletcher thanked God, Fletcher repeated his gratitude towards a God that looked over a white man and his interests. And that struck me, number one, because obviously, like being stolen from a continent and brought over into this white man's world, they probably didn't have this recollection of what God meant in our sense. And so that struck me. And then again, on page 133, it said at the very bottom, it said Randall forbade religion on his plantation to eliminate the distraction of deliverance. And so it's just interesting to see religion in this context, from her perspective, because from the white person's perspective, if we were reading this book from their perspective, so much of this stuff they would mask it with it's God's work.
Yep.
Mhm.
And so I think that it was a really interesting perspective to write in the book, to have to kind of there again be faced with this, where it's just like, God didn't do anything for her.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
You know, why would she have any type of pull towards this when all she saw was these, you know, the white man and his interests were
Mhm.
being given by God. And
Mhm.
so it just I don't know. That was another theme that I had been interested in this book, was that appearance of religion and kind of the like the lack thereof
Mm.
for
Yeah.
this main character.
Completely.
And so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. They also, Ethel brings up religion on 186 after Cora is sick and Ethel's taking care of her. I have a couple things underlined. The main one that like kind of grabbed me by the throat was, all men are created equal unless we decide you're not a man. Because it's in this, on the same vein, it's
Mm-hmm.
Cora kind of grappling with, you know, Bible verses in the same way of the Declaration of Independence, of like, how can you read this book that says, you know, you can't have slaves, you can't enslave human beings, but then gives permission,
Yep.
you know?
Mhm.
But it says, oh, another one says, where the scripture condemns slavery, it is not speaking of Negro slavery at all. That's Ethel to Cora.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mhm.
yeah.
Well, and
It
at the
doesn't.
very top of that page, it says, it wouldn't be very Christian of me to let a heathen into my house. And
Mhm.
so it's already so othering.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
this appearance of religion is like, well, God exists, but not for you.
Yeah.
Mhm. One of the things that I find intriguing is
Yeah.
that while Cora's in the attic and she's reading the Bible, she's more interested in asking like what words mean as opposed to like what certain passages mean. And
Mhm.
frequently the response that she gets is, well, I don't really know what that means. So how much of what they learn do they
Mhm.
actually know
Oh my
that
God.
they
Yeah.
understand, or are they putting their own belief of what they think it is into it? You know what I mean? So like, I think this word means this thing, so that's how I'm going to interpret this. And I
Mhm.
mean, how many different times has the Bible been translated, through how many different languages, to get to a certain point here where you don't really know what it means? So how easy is it to kind of be led
Yeah.
into a certain way of being like, this justifies the way that I feel about it because I say so?
Oh,
Well,
That's possible, right?
Tracy, yes.
that's a whole nother conversation.
I was going to say, I want to have that conversation someday, because as someone who grew up Catholic, I'm extremely interested.
Yeah.
It's like, who translated this? What were their, you know, prerogatives?
Objectives.
Why were they all men? Like, it's like, yeah. I'm
Well-
currently reading the Gospel of Mary according to Mary Magdalene, and it's fucking
Ooh.
gnarly.
Well,
It's great. Yeah.
as a medieval historian, the Bible was purposefully in a language that the common masses did not speak. And
Yeah.
that was on purpose. The church did not want people to understand what they were saying, but so they would attend church services and hear the priest speaking in Latin to them and have no idea what they were saying.
Yep. Latin Mass is still a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was done on purpose.
Yep.
And also the Bible. Yeah. Okay. Never mind.
Well, no, because what you're saying is
It
like,
would take too long.
I'm with you.
Yeah, but this comes back to this too. Power uses its way to gain and keep power.
Yes.
So the church didn't want, I mean, when the Reformation happened, how many people died just so that they could read their personal beliefs in a Bible that's supposed to be about their savior, their well-being? Like, people died to make that happen
Yeah.
because losing power for people in power sucks. And you have the same thing happening here where it's like, I'd rather continue to make someone else's life a living hell than face the fact that I'm a monster.
Yes. And to bring that back in the context of racism, there's this idea that they have throughout the book that I think is very much alive today, is like this fear of, but if we're all equal, then what's going to stop you from turning around and doing what I did to you, like you doing that back to me? And would I deserve it if you did, kind of a thing?
Yeah.
Like these are the kinds of questions that I think are important to think about. And it's why, I'm interested in dismantling systems of domination and trying to find equitable solutions.
Well, I think that what you just said too ties us back into the forced sterilization, where the white people, and even in the book, you kind of start to see them like sweat a little bit because they're like, oh my God, we brought these people over here forcefully. We for I mean, I don't like to say we bred them, but they did.
They did.
They bred their slaves on purpose so
Yeah.
that they could continue to have generations of slavery. And then all of a sudden they realize, oh my gosh, Black people outnumber us.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden we have to come up with a sneaky way of population control.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's also a big part of this book, is talking about sexual violence.
I bet.
Sexual violence
I
in the
bet.
context of race. It's yeah.
Let's do that one and the revolt against chivalry one as well. Because that's like women's suffrage
and
along with like anti-lynching campaigns in the United States as well.
we'll
just go for all the fun and easy, lighthearted, happy topics. We should throw a couple of those in there every once in a while, though, just to like keep our brains happy.
Yes. But this one is a collection of readings too. So we could even like take a couple chapters from your book, take a couple chapters of this, and kind of we don't have to. It's it's 300 pages. It's obviously all really good and all really necessary to read. But if we want to just chew on one, or like,
we'll have
think
to
about it.
We'll have to get a excuse me. We'll have to get a reading list together.
Yes, please.
Like, yeah. There are so many books to read, and I feel like I'm just beginning, and it's really fun because so much reading for school was not always what I wanted to be reading, but I'm really grateful that I had all of that behind me so that like I could feel at least somewhat educated coming to this. But I always, anytime I start reading anything, I'm just kind of reminded of how little I know about anything.
Same.
I'm like, I know nothing.
But that's the true attitude of a student.
Yes.
Because if you go into something and you're like, wow, I don't really know very much about this topic, that's good. Because there are so many people in the world that are just like, oh, I don't need to waste my time on that. I already know. And it's just like, well, actually, that's a really arrogant take because you know nothing. So
I agree. I'm with you.
There is a quote by Plato, I think, where he says, all that I know is that I know nothing at all. And he's considered one of the most, famous philosophers of all time. So there's that.
Yes.
There's problems there, though, too.
Obviously.
That's
Say no to grooming. No grooming minors. We can't. No, don't stand that. But I want to say, Tracy, I'm so thankful that you picked this book and that you invited me to read it. because this is not something that I would have like just picked up, especially like honestly, especially the title being the Underground Railroad. You look at it and you're like, that is gonna hurt.
Mm-hmm.
That's gonna
Mm-hmm.
kick me in the teeth and not be super comfortable. But
Mm-hmm.
reading it has changed my perspective on a lot of different things, and it's
Mm-hmm.
challenged me to think about race and our country, where
Yeah.
we've been, where we're going.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you inviting me to read this and
Aw.
talk
Yeah.
about it with you.
I
I'm so
agree.
glad you could join. Yeah. And what about let's see here. I think we have about what time is it?
Yeah, no, and
Okay.
I'm not trying to like close out. I feel like I've been wanting to say
No, no,
thank you
no.
for.
Well, you're welcome. I love any opportunity I get to speak with you and with Laurel. I mean, I've lost track of how many really good conversations I've had with the two of you. And I know I would potentially feel I wouldn't want to do this by myself,
Mhm.
you know? And the idea of watching the television show, it's intimidating. Like
Yeah.
I've already watched it once and it
Yeah.
was really hard to watch,
Yeah.
but I want to watch it again and have an opportunity to talk about it, because even if it is taken from the book, there are certain things that are done differently, and the opportunity to showcase Black actors is
Mhm.
still something that is not as frequently done as it
Mm.
could be in our mainstream media. So this entire cast is just,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine what it would be like to have to act in some of the scenes
Yeah.
that people had to for these particular scenes to have their effectiveness. And
Yeah.
even as graphic as some of the images are in the book, I think Colson Whitehead does a really good job of almost being tactful,
Mhm.
if
Oh
you
yeah.
will. Like he's not writing this as gore to attract you. Do
Yeah,
you know what I
this
mean?
isn't a Quentin Tarantino movie where white people just get to say the N-word a bunch, and
Mm-mm.
that's always been so sus to me. I'm like, really? Do we like Django Unchained? I like, yeah, no, I get it, I do, but it's also like
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel
I
as
think
though there.
I appreciate this a lot from
Mhm.
not going into the what could potentially be like yeah,
Almost torture porn, if you will.
yes, that's what I was looking for. Yeah.
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 I admit it. I'm totally on board for like dark, scary, gruesome.
Me
But
too.
this is not like, this show is not that.
Yeah.
It's visceral
Yes.
in the way it made me feel. So we'll have to watch it so we can be emotional support for each other and
Yeah.
get through it to get to the other side of it, because I don't know, I think it's worth watching. I think it's worth talking about. I love that we have a platform to do it.
Yeah. I'm in.
And of course we'll be filling out like a calendar and stuff
Mm.
soon too.
Yeah.
Um I have us at just about time for us to wrap up. And before we do that, I just wanted to make sure that you both had a chance to talk about everything that you wanted to talk about. If there's anything you think might be coming up next that you're looking forward to talking about, because we still have the other half of the book to go.
Yeah.
So
I hit all my notes actually. So
you're so good.
Mhm. Yeah.
Our
No,
professors would be so proud.
yes.
hmm
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I feel like I said everything I needed to say.
Yeah. I feel
tune
like
in next
anything that,
week for more.
Yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say, just come back and really like join our Discord. There are always things happening on our Discord. There are links to it. I'm pretty sure we'll have those in our show notes once this all gets like put up in YouTube land. But
Yes.
I don't know. I'm okay with wrapping this up a little smidgen early.
Yeah.
Mostly because my bladder is tiny and really full.
I know. It's
So
a
I-
miracle I've sat and not had to pee for 2 hours.
Tracy's frozen.
Tracy.
Tracy.
There she is.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Oh, there she is.
Whoops.
That's okay.
I hit my thing the wrong way. Oh, well. I'll just put a thing up on our thing that says, sorry, Tracy doesn't know how to use technology. And that was the fun, abrupt ending for everyone. Okay, I will be in touch with you both about finishing this up and when we want to schedule it, because I don't want to always go over. Go ahead.
Are we still live?
We might still be on. We are on YouTube still live. That's so weird. I think. I don't know.
Well, I was just gonna say that.
We are. Okay. We are.
Okay. Well, yeah. I'm thinking about scheduling. I don't know if I should like save that for.
We'll do that in a chat together. But it's kind of nice to know that like we can at least say goodbye now.
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone. We'll be back.
Woohoo!
All right.
Yes.
Bye, friends.
Bye.
Gonna end. Okay.